Well, welcome everyone to session 7D. Session 7D, why the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Information Security Officer, the CDO and the CISO, partnerships are critical for business success. A really compelling question. And to lead us in that discussion is Marianne Bailey. She is the cybersecurity practice leader for Guidehouse. And she will introduce herself and the rest of the folks on the panel. So take it away, Marianne.
Great. Thank you very much, Derek. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today and to moderate this panel of esteemed leaders in data and cybersecurity. My name is Marianne Bailey, and I lead the cybersecurity practice at Guidehouse. Prior to working at Guidehouse, I have 30+ years experience leading cybersecurity across the federal government. All of those years, I was an employee of the National Security Agency. I led the cybersecurity organization at the National Security Agency, which is approximately 3,000 SMEs tackling nation-state cyber adversaries. I also was the principal director, deputy CIO for cybersecurity for the Department of Defense and the Pentagon. And I spent decades leading cybersecurity engineering organizations at NSA. So I would like to go to each one of our panelists and let them quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with questions. So I'll start with Ren.
Hi there, my name is Renessen, and I'm the Chief Data Officer at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And I need to just start, as most federal agency employees need to start with a disclaimer that these views and opinions are my own. They don't represent guidance or advice of the Bureau. So that said, my journey to the CDO role and my views and opinions come from over 25 years of experience working with data in both the research, policy, and management roles from the nonprofit sector to academia to government. So I've worked at the CFPB for the last 10 years, and I come from the business side working through mortgage market data. And 2 years ago, I stood up our Office of the Chief Data Officer. So in that function, I also serve as the senior agency official of privacy. And in this role, I coordinate very closely with our CIO and our CISO. And so those will be some of the strong links that I'm going to talk about today, those links between the privacy and the cyber components of an agency.
Great. Don?
Hi, pleasure to be here today. I'm Don Heckman. I'm a director here at Guidehouse, working for Marianne and the cyber security team. I lead our defense cyber solutions, as well as our data protection and privacy offerings. I have over 36 years of experience in government leadership and cybersecurity across DoD, the intelligence community, and the national security sectors. And prior to coming to Guidehouse, similar to Marianne, I served as the Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity and Deputy CISO for the Department of Defense. And then prior to that, I led two of the largest cybersecurity solutions development and services organizations at the National Security Agency. It's my pleasure to be here today.
Jack?
Yeah, thanks, Marianne. I'm Jack OMeara. I'm a director at Guidehouse. I work with Marianne and Don in our cyber solutions organization. I lead our incident prevention and response service offering, as well as our cyber litigation support service offering. I've been involved in cybersecurity for far too long. Late 80s, I got involved. For 13.5 years of my 30+ career, I was Chief Information Security Officer, 11 years of that at a large aerospace and defense contractor. And then the last 2 years before joining Guidehouse, I was with a global IT services firm. So worked a lot with chief privacy officers, chief data officers. At the time I was a CISO. We're still kind of being kicked around the boardroom and talked about in periodicals, but it's nice to see that that's come to fruition, and really look forward to speaking with you all today, and honored that you joined our session. Thanks, hope it's informative.
Great, thanks everybody. So just to kind of kick this off, I think we all know data is extremely important today. You know, we live in this ever expanding digital ecosystem. Things like the introduction of, global cloud computing, employees following the sun, meaning, wherever the sun's up, that's where our employees are that support this, and lots of innovative technology. We're all realizing amazing potential by harnessing the power of data. So in that same venue, our data is often spread around the globe and shared with many business partners. Many agencies and companies don't even know where all of their data is located today. And I can guarantee you that your data is just as valuable, if not more, to our cyber adversaries as it is to your mission. So it's more important than ever to ensure that you're adequately protecting your data. So kind of with that backdrop, I'd like to start with our questions. My first question is going to Ren. So Ren, we all understand how extremely powerful data is today for business and mission enablement. Most organizations rely on their data to make incredibly important decisions. So can you discuss the importance of data in your business, as well as the concerns that you should have, people should have regarding protecting their data? And then after Ren answers Don, I'd like you to kind of chime in behind her, please.
Great, Marianne. That's a great question. I think we all know that data is more important than ever for driving business outcomes, and that's true as well in the federal government. It's great to see that that the federal government is having kind of a grand rethinking of government data management, and that renewed focus came about through the Evidence Act that was passed in 2019. So that calls for your agencies to use data as a strategic asset, to help data to inform our work, to manage that enterprise risk, and to also promote public transparency. So you'll see a big call for government to provide more of their data into an open environment, which also brings with it different kinds of challenges as well. And so all of this really is a renewed focus and an emphasis on coordination across the CDO shop with other business partners. And so certainly we work closely with our CIO. Our CISO actually reports up to our CIO. And we work closely together to ensure that we are focused on those business outcomes. At the Bureau, we're an agency that's just 10 years old. So we were really born in the digital age. So we have some advantages compared to some of our federal partners. We don't have as many silos of data or unknown data sources. We started with a centralized data management approach. So we do actually have a data catalog and know where all of our data is. But we really see ourselves as being data-driven and to drive our decision-making. And that might be from everything from how we use data to conduct research and monitor financial markets, to how we develop regulations, also to enforce consumer financial laws, supervising covered financial institutions. Not only that, but also providing financial education back out to consumers and handling consumer complaints. So some back and forth of consumers' data as well. So you can imagine with this diverse set of goals, business goals, that we have many, many stakeholders to manage across. And so we have addressed that through a centralized data management program that we'll talk about a little bit later. But really our role is to ensure that we know what the data is that we're collecting and have a centralized process for doing that, and then to protect the data. So that leads me to the question you have, Marianne, about concerns of, where we might have data concerns. A couple things that we are focused on. First off, we want to maintain strong public trust for all of our data activities. The worst thing to have happen is to have a data incident and really erode that trust, where consumers or financial institutions would not want to provide data to us. So that's the number one thing. We see it as a real responsibility to be transparent and have clear rules of the road for our agency about how we are managing that data. In fact, if you go to our website, we actually published sources and uses of data before the Evidence Act was passed, to describe the policies that we have in place, to describe the data that we do have at the Bureau and make that transparent to everyone, and to talk about the rules of the road and how we both use and reuse data at the Bureau. We also work to minimize what we collect, and that's always a great first principle. It's a basis for most privacy programs, which is called data minimization. We have about 9 privacy principles that we use to guide our work, and that's really important. Another place where we have a strong intersection back with our CISO is that, security, the weakest link of security is often individuals. And so making sure that you have a really robust training program is super important to ensure that the individuals in your agency or your organization are following the rules. Along with that, we've ensured that we have strong access controls. So over the last 2 years, we've implemented a new enterprise-wide data policy and strong access controls to get access into the data. So to make sure that we're following that principle, that you need to have a need to know to see the data in order to be able to use that data. So we ensure that we have these appropriate safeguards on our systems, and then we work closely with our CISO to ensure that we have strong security. We can talk later about that intersection of security and privacy controls. So I'll look forward to that conversation.
Don, can you chime in on that also?
Sure. From a CISO perspective, it's really about protecting the environment and the data. And so CISOs typically focus on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of critical assets. As was previously mentioned, preventing data breaches and disclosures, which can have monetary and reputational damage to their organizations. And so, some of the things we just heard about: strong identity and access management, limiting access to the data, sometimes can be at odds with what the CDO is trying to accomplish. The other thing CISOs really focus on: legal and regulatory compliance requirements for data protection and privacy. I think, as we heard previously, starting with, kind of privacy by design and security by design from the start, to include working with the CDO on a overall data strategy, data governance program, are critical so that they don't end up being at odds with each other.
Great, thank you. One of the questions I would have just listening to the two of you talking is, we talk about the power of data. We talk about protecting data. Everybody knows about PII and PHI and all this regulated data that we have to protect. But and we're using data more and more today to make critical, very, very important decisions. But people don't really think about, how an adversary could wreak havoc in your mission if they manipulated your data. They don't take it, they don't do anything, but they're actually manipulating your data. So all this data analytics and AI and all these cool things that you're doing today, they're drawing false conclusions for you because, the adversary. We haven't even really seen a lot of that today, but I would project that's probably what we're going to see in the future. My next question, and Jack and I actually worked on an engagement together, so I really want him to kind of talk about this, but how important is a robust enterprise data governance program to enable synchronization between the CISO and the CDO? And then, Jack, and I'm gonna, ask this to you first and then to Ren, but have you been involved with organizations that do not have a robust data governance program, and what was the outcome of that? So Jack, can't really talk about the client that we supported, but you can certainly talk about the impact. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Marianne. Yeah, that was a lot of long days and weekends, and but we were called in post-breach to help an organization kind of figure out. They realized that they had all of these contractual requirements that said they had, all these controls in place. And so we were called in basically to start pulling back the covers. And we had a series of meetings, collected a lot of artifacts because it was, the position I was given is, okay, Jack, if this thing goes to court and we ask you as an expert witness, does firm X do a reasonable job of, this specific contractual requirement? So it was almost a year-long engagement. This company had grown through acquisition and had not done a very good job, like a lot. I mean, I've been with companies that grew through acquisition before too, and it's very difficult to integrate them into your enterprise for various reasons, technical debt, different types of clients and engagements that they work on. So that became very apparent as we talked to the individual CISOs, CIOs, and technical IT staff of each of these individual subsidiaries of this larger company, global company, that nobody really had a handle on what was going on. And, we met with them and we said, okay, you say that you have encryption set up on this VPN, so bring up a screen and show me, or send me a screenshot. We did a lot of that, hours and hours of doing that. And so it's really important. And I got to admit, I'm really proud of Ren and her ability to do that at CFPB. Of the 13 and a half years I was a CISO, that was one of the hardest things to do, is know exactly where the data was. I worked very closely with the Chief Privacy Officer. They were awesome. If there was a data breach, they stayed abreast of all 50 state laws and international laws. So I could say, okay, what kind of data do I have to worry about in this specific one? And I would work the technical remediation with the IT team, and they would take care of all of the who needed to get notified, what we could say to them, what we couldn't say to them, setting up the external credit monitoring and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, having an appropriate governance process in place, and then really knowing where both your structured and unstructured data are of the types of data that you have to protect, that you have statutory regulatory obligations to protect is key. Over to you, Ren.
Great, thanks, Jack. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of challenges, and I like to think of data governance as a journey. You know, we think of it as continuous improvement, because certainly in the same way in the cyberspace where adversaries, you know, they continue to evolve and use new strategies. The business side continues to evolve and want to use new tools. Certainly, as we're trying to meet the mission of the agency, you can't just say stop and don't do anything new. So you have to constantly be thinking about your data governance program in terms of knowing what's happening, knowing what new systems are coming online, knowing the needs of the business, so you can kind of get ahead of that to even know where you might want to direct people. Hey, start with FedRAMP systems, for example. You know, that could make it a lot easier to go through the ATO process on the cyber side. So in that way, you can be very informed by the business and get ahead of where they're wanting to head by knowing what their kind of business needs are. The worst thing is to be surprised by, you know, a director's initiative or something else that's brand new with a lot of pressure on it, only to realize that it's a system that really is not going to be able to be approved. So get ahead of that with your business side, knowing where they're heading. I will say for us, we have a centralized enterprise data management approach, as I mentioned. I'll just describe it a little bit because I think it's kind of an interesting model. We have 3 advisory boards that report up and advise me, and we have broad participation on each one of these. So there's a call in the Evidence Act for the federal agencies to have a data governance board, and that's to have leadership coming together to talk about data, possibly your data strategy. We actually use that to advise us on data policy, and that's where we get a lot of insights, because we have leadership from across each of the divisions who come and tell us the kinds of things that they're going to want to see, that their leadership is trying to do, so that we can be there as partners for brainstorming solutions. So like to be on the solution side rather than the problem coming to us later. So that's our data governance board. That's where we assess the risks and the benefits of any new tools or ways that we may want to use or reuse our data assets. We also have a data intake group, and we've created a lot of discipline around this around the agency. Maybe not always well loved, but I think people don't realize how many headaches we're solving. And that is that we have everybody in one room. So when you want to bring in a new data set, or you want to reuse data that exists in the agency, you need to go through that data intake group. We have a pretty streamlined approach, a 5-day turnaround on that, depending on the complexity. And everyone sits on that advisory body. So we have the CISO sitting right there who can ask questions. Oftentimes then it might follow on with a vendor call. Let's really understand the system that would be coming online and understand what's underneath that. We have our chief privacy officer who sits there to talk about what kind of PII might you be collecting. We have our legal division who's sitting there and saying, hey, what's the need to know? And gee, does this follow with our Dodd-Frank provisions that give us the authorities to bring in this data? Are there MOUs and other things that we need to be reviewing? So getting everyone in the room from the get-go to know what kinds of things need to be worked through. Then we have a centralized team, our data governance team, that runs that down. They're very business-minded. They're focused on helping to get things done for the business partner, but at the same time, they're also communicating constantly about the kinds of things that need to be done just to meet all the kinds of compliance thresholds to ensure that we're doing things in a secure manner. So we also on the back end then think about how we're releasing our data to the public, and we have a data release group and an advisory body there. And ultimately, we also work closely with our sister when we go to look at that disposition, whether that's the records management or the disposing of data. So what I would just say is data governance ensures that you have this strong coordination. It also means you have a lot of eyes and ears on the ground. So a lot of times you might not hear something formally, but you're hearing it because a business partner might have heard it someplace and they brought it to the dig. So that relationship building is really the fabric of creating a strong program. We help each other to flag things, and then in that way, people really start to learn each other's business and know the kinds of risks that might be coming down and how to address those risks. So, so those are some of the intersections that we have through our data management program, and a close tie then across to our cyber team. So while we might be identifying the PII, it's really cyber's job to safeguard that PII that's maintained in our system, but really we work together to ensure that appropriate protection.
Great, thank you. So that leads right into my next question. And you talked about relationships. And we also got a question on our chat talking about relationships. So can you talk a little bit about why it's important for a CDO, a CISO, a CTO, a CIO to all have incredible working relationships, and then maybe address a little bit why this might not naturally happen, you know? Why have we seen cases where that doesn't happen? I think all of us can talk about cases. I mean, we have Ren, you're a CDO, so you're coming at it from that perspective, and you also have a privacy hat that you wear. Jack has been a commercial CISO in some large commercial organizations, and Don's been a CISO in a huge government organization. So I'm sure, all three of you have seen where it works and where it doesn't work. And if you could just address what some of those challenges would be. So, Ren, I'll just go right back to you first.
Sure. So obviously it all comes down to relationships. And I think that's why you see that in the Evidence Act. And I've been hearing it all day today on different panels. You may have as well, and I think this question about how do you coordinate across is an important one. Look, it does come down to relationships. There can be, I mean, in a good way, data is driving all of our agencies now and all of our organizations in different ways. So there might be different kinds of sense of ownership to meet that director imperative. I was just hearing that on another panel where someone was talking about you have all these competing C-suites, and maybe in the business world that's even more cutthroat than it is in government. But certainly people want to take credit for the things that could happen. So I think I always approach it, how do we share credit for the work that gets done, and how do we solve the problems of our leadership? Because leadership would always love us to come together to solve a problem versus to have the problem kind of percolate up to them. So, and really for us across the CDO and the CISO, what we're seeing now is a renewed call and a huge change that has just come down at the end of 2020. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, what we call NIST, has just released their updated Rev 5 requirements in federal government. And this requires strong coordination across cyber and privacy. And so in that way, these controls that we do, all these reviews and controls on the data and on the systems, that's going to be entirely integrated. So that's how our auditors are going to look at it. And that's how everyone's going to be looking at the risk. So I think in that way, there is a new risk framework that's a little bit different than meeting the demands of the business side. But the risk framework is absolutely heading in the direction to say, look, as a CDO, you cannot step around issues of privacy and security. Privacy and security needs to be baked into the things that you want to do for the business side. So I think you have to tackle them hand in hand.
Yeah, and one of the things I found effective when I was CISO is we put together, I think it was called Cybersecurity Steering Committee, and we met monthly. And the participation was really, it was the Chief Privacy Officer, myself, the CISO, the CIO. We didn't have a CDO yet. Like I said, that was kind of a buzzword that was floating around, but there was a lot of talk about hiring CDOs. We had our Chief Counsel, and then we also had representatives from each of our market-facing segments that actually deliver products and services to clients. And I would get together and kind of give us a report card, and they would talk about some of the challenges that we had and why we were sometimes an obstacle to the business because we made it very difficult to use the tools that they had to use and get to some of the data that they needed to get to. So it was a really good collective. We also had the head of our communications and public relations that were part of that committee too, so that if something did go south, they were well aware of where we were really at from our cyber posture perspective. But kind of the silver lining in all of this is a lot of the folks that participated in that cyber steering committee were actually, had to sign off on the SOC 2 reports and were actually real chief officers. They were what they called C16B officers that had skin in the game, where I was typically more of I always liked to refer myself as a risk advisor. And what made that really nice is there was a big push to the CEO and our chief financial officer. Hey, you need to get Jack more money. You know, he doesn't have adequate budget to run his program. We need him to do that. You've dumped money into helping us sell product. You've dumped money into data privacy and data protection, but we really need the CISO. So that was cool. And then we were all together. So when an incident did happen, we all knew each other. There was an element of trust there. And we worked very well together to make sure that our data protection obligations were getting met, or we were on at least the right path to meeting them.
Great, thanks, Jack. You know, one of the areas I think from a technology perspective that we really need to be aware of today is, like I've mentioned a couple of times, technology brings great innovative things for us. And, you know, I do think that some of the challenges, we get technologists, which are CTOs and even mission owners that really want to lean forward with all these great innovative technologies, but they haven't really dove in it to really understand what that means from the data. And when I was in my position in the Pentagon, the current Secretary of Defense was very, very proactive with being more innovative, more Silicon Valley-ish, and he actually brought his whole team in that reported directly to him, which meant, you know, they didn't necessarily adhere to policies and all that kind of stuff that we set up. So it drove us crazy. And they stood up some very, very innovative stuff. And it turned out that we had a data leakage there. And then when I was called in to come figure out where the data was, you know, they were innovating some pretty awesome, cool SaaS solution to do all this data analytics, but little did they know that there were like 5 other SaaS companies involved in it. And so when we start tracking down this leakage, we didn't just go to this one company, and then we just follow this thread, and we're finding out, you know, our data is all over the country, and people have it that we didn't even knew had it. And it just became kind of a nightmare. It made me really start worrying about SaaS and how, you know, does it get difficult with all this innovative technology that we're seeing to follow that thread through second, third, fourth order effects. I mean, we talk a lot in cyber and cyber risk about third party risk, but it's really third party, and then it's fourth party and fifth party and sixth party. And so it becomes very, very complicated. So it just makes it, you know, we really definitely have to really understand where our data is going, what we're connecting to.
Marianne, just to build off of that, I would just say, you know, what we also see is data in a test environment. So being really careful. People think, oh, I'm just going to be testing on this data, but then are you really opening that up? And so really paying attention to what your administrators are doing is a really critical component to make sure that you're securing your data. And I bet Don and Jack might have some other suggestions, but that's one I know we've seen out there.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to spend a moment and talk about the Chief Privacy Officer and why it's so important for them to be included in the discussions on the life cycle of an organization's data, collecting, processing, storing, deleting, protecting data. And then, you know, we have a question which kind of ties maybe a little bit into this from in our chat session, which says, how should we handle need to know for data mining projects? By data mining, I mean searching the data set to understand if insights can be generated via unsupervised learning or similar methods. So if you guys can kind of address the Chief Privacy Officer and then look at, you know, how do we handle that with data mining projects? So how about I'll start with Don.
Yeah, so, you know, I think, you know, privacy's, you know, kind of an interesting topic. And if you follow privacy at all, you'll know that more and more countries, and in the US states, since we don't have a uniform national privacy law, are enacting more and more stringent privacy requirements. So it's imperative that the CDOs, you know, CPO, Chief Privacy Officer, and CISO really work together as a team to ensure you're in compliance with those privacy laws and regulations, because you know, there are, you know, large monetary fines being put in place by the EU and others if you know, do not follow those regulations and laws. And I think there's an interesting challenge of unintended disclosure of information based on, you know, piecing together multiple disparate sets of data that individually may not constitute a breach, but when combined, using AI or machine learning and data analytics could become sensitive under the definition of the law and a violation. We used to call that data aggregation in the DoD when you had, multiple unclassified things, but when you aggregate them and put them together, they could have inadvertently become classified. And so I think, that's an area where there's going to have to be some, kind of careful thinking. And I think, as Ren said, having, the data management strategies and policies that actually talk through, access and access management and potentially even thinking about, are there ways we can train, these algorithms to either understand, or if nothing else, look for flags and then potentially, kick it into a sandbox where, a human could potentially review and make the final decision.
Yeah, I think any of us that have been involved in any type of a cyber breach, and Jack runs our incident prevention and response practice at Guidehouse. The first thing that he tells people to do is to tabletop exercise a breach, and they better get to know their chief privacy officer really, really well, right? Because if you don't know her before you have a breach, you haven't been doing the right things, it's not the time to learn and to figure out who they are and what rules are. When I was in the Pentagon, we had the OPM breach, 24.1 million individuals' privacy, the most, the most protected information that you could find out about people. It's everything people need to have clearances, which is their entire life, their family, their children, your bank accounts, your credit. I mean, it's everything that you can imagine. And we had this massive, massive breach. I was the deputy CISO at the time. I had never worked with our privacy officer. I got to know her incredibly well. I learned what a lot of the laws were on that information. The crazy thing was, this is that third party thing again. It wasn't, while it was our data, it wasn't in our networks, and our networks weren't breached. There's another agency that had it all because that was their job and their mission, but it was actually the data of our people. So sometimes it can become very, very complicated. So I don't know if anybody has any other kind of examples why it's so important to have a chief privacy officer, when it worked, when it didn't work.
Yeah, I think what's really beneficial of chief privacy officer and chief data officer is because the CISO typically reports into the IT department. And I always like to say we have the boxes that store and process, the data that the company needs to do their job. Is they can be real advocates for business process change, because oftentimes we would want to deploy things like information rights management and data labeling, but the company didn't have the business processes in place, the various departments to even handle that, right? They would have to completely re-engineer. So I think having that chief privacy officer and chief data officer working in concert with one another to drive the business process change in the company can be a real enabler for some of the technology where you can better protect the data as the IT department. Ren, any thoughts there?
I think she's frozen.
Ren may have froze, yeah.
Hey, so Jack, just kind of back to you really quickly. What's your perspective? You've worked around a lot of these roles for much of your career.
Why you want to have
you find one of them more important than the other ones?
Oh, I think Ren's trying to say something, so I'll hold that thought, Marianne.
All right.
You're breaking up, Ren. Like I said, I don't think there's any one role more important than another. It's like any team, a sports team, a military team, a family. Each member of that family, each member of that team, each member of that troop, if you will, has a certain role to play. And if you're not all operating in your own swim lane and collectively understand what each other's roles and responsibilities are, who's accountable, it's the old racing matrix. Without that, so I wouldn't say one role is more important than the other. They all have a level of importance. And, unfortunately, if you have a narcissist on the team, then one becomes a little more important than the others, or a lot more important than the others. But I think that's the the exception rather than the rule.
So I had a follow-up question for Ren, but I don't think we have her. Ren, are you able to talk? No, I think not. Okay. So, one of my kind of pet peeves is that I don't think people actually kind of get the magnitude of data that they have. And I would say that Don and I, in working in the government, one of the biggest challenges was ensuring that individuals protected their data, which could be mission system designs, right? We worked in the DoD, it could be major weapon system design, it could be all types of mission design information. And we saw lots of this data being exfilled from our adversaries. I spent much of my career working with those individuals that actually owned those programs. And of course, they were driven by very different things: cost, schedule, performance, right? Security was really at the back of their mind on this. And I can't say that we've really cracked that nut today. I mean, I think it's starting to come to the forefront. Don, can you talk about, a little bit of those challenges and, where do you think we need to go, and some of the concerns we have?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I think Ren had said, right, I think, and even Jack with the, how the roles and relationships really work together. Again, I think it's critical that, and, CDOs within the DoD, are, just, being established, and relatively known, I think, across government. And so, but I think, critical to each is really having, them focus, as Jack said, on their areas of responsibility, and they can be complementary, and then really having that dialogue to make sure that you don't, as a CISO, you could put up all kinds of fences and walls and technical controls and make it practically impossible for someone to get their job done. And Marianne, you and I have seen that happen, right? Where a lot of our, users complained a lot about the lack of user friendliness or acceptability for some of the solutions that were put in place. And so I think really having that open dialogue with the CDO, the CISO, the Chief Privacy Officer, so that you can give your customers or your users the most positive experience possible to allow each to do their jobs and actually innovate and deliver better solutions for the clients.
Great, Don, thanks. So I see Ren is back with us. We have 2 minutes left. I'm going to throw the last question at her for her to take us to the finish line. So Ren, as a CDO, can you tell us what your top priorities are, and how do you work with your CISO to enable those priorities? And over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I apologize for the problems there. Yes, I think the biggest thing is to be working hand in hand. We're here to serve the mission of the agency, and at the same time, we need to be very focused on the right risk metrics. So a lot of times with a CISO, everything can be a risk. So how do we really focus it on the right risks for the agency, have a real conversation about that against the backdrop of our business outcomes? So I would focus there and thinking through how we manage our high value assets and how we work together really towards those greatest areas of risk.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a great discussion and really important stuff that we're working on.
Marianne, thank you very much. Thanks to Ren and Donald and Jack as well. Yeah, really good discussion and thought-provoking. I remember when we first started the symposium some years back, there was some discussions about, the CISO's role and the Chief Data Officer's role, and kind of bringing them together And it was something that people kind of pushed aside and kind of swept under the carpet and said, yeah, we'll sort that out later. And I'm glad later has come.
Yes.
Because it clearly is critical to have those relationships and that dialogue and be on the same team. I think you guys brought that out really well. So thanks so much for highlighting it, put the spotlight on that aspect.
Right.
I think that's it for today. So hopefully everyone gets a good night and comes back bright-eyed and bushy-tailed tomorrow. We look forward to seeing everyone. Thanks again for closing us out strong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
It was
evening,
our
everybody.
pleasure.